All right, Des Linden, welcome to the Singletrack Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
There's a lot I want to talk about in this conversation, but first, and this honestly may be the first time you've ever been asked this on a podcast, but you probably, I should say this, you probably have 100% name recognition, even in the trail and ultra running worlds. But for anyone in the audience that doesn't follow the road running world too closely, could you provide some background in your career, perhaps like where you're based, what you specialize in, and like notable accolades over the past 5 to 10 years?
Sure. Happy to do that. And it is kind of funny because trail's a totally different world. So I respect the question. I'm Des Linden, road specialist, graduated from Arizona State, was a 2-time All-American and once in cross country, once in track. Decided to test my luck at the professional world and joined the Hanson's Brooks team right out of college and was on the roads for a bit there. Eventually dabbled in the marathon and finally kind of found my place in the sport. Made 2 U.S. Olympic teams in the marathon, was runner-up at the 2011 Boston Marathon by 2 seconds, which will break your heart, but stuck with it a while longer and was able to get a victory in 2018 at Boston in some epic conditions. So I think those are probably the big highlights.
That's perfect. Well, I do ultimately in this conversation want to focus on your interests at this present moment in our trail and ultra running world, but there's a couple questions I've always wanted to ask you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but from what I understand, you had intentions to pursue a career in sports performance psychology if this whole running professionally thing didn't work out. So can you talk about that and where those interests were born out of?
Yeah, that is still the backup plan. So hopefully I never really have to tap into it, but I think someday that would be a fun kind of avenue to pursue. It's also like I'm into a bunch of different things, but it's like the safest one that sounds like a real career. So it's my default answer for now. But yeah, I mean, I studied psychology and religious studies in college, which makes me effectively useless in the real world. But I do think there's kind of this intersection there, like how the mind works and why we are the way we are and what makes us tick and what's motivating us and so on and so forth. And, I think there's everyone in running, like when you get to a certain level, is looking for their 1%. And some people it's like supplements or nutrition or, hit the gym a little bit harder, add more mileage. There's all these different things. And I think a thing we totally neglect is between the ears. Like that mental side for me, that 1%, I think has kept me in the sport, like just being a little bit mentally tougher or more aware anyhow, of believing in myself or limitations and getting through them and so on and so forth. So I just find that space really underappreciated. And I think when you get it right, like, man, it's a game changer. So it's always kind of fascinated me. And I don't have formal background in it beyond undergrad, but I've read a lot and I'm always kind of working that side of the sport.
Well, I know you are a voracious reader, and I got to give a shout out to a fellow runner in our community. Maybe you know her. Her name's Addie Bracey. She runs for Nike, but she wrote a book specifically tailored to ultra runners, like mental performance for ultra running. It's a great read. We had her on the pod a couple months ago. But I guess I'm curious, based off your answer, and I ask this of anybody when we're talking about like career decisions and stuff, when it comes to sport performance psychology, did you take that avenue, or were you interested in that avenue because you had a knack for it and you were just interested in it, or were you searching for answers and improvements primarily as it pertains to running?
It was probably more answers and just figuring. I think I kind of stalled in college a little bit, and there was a lack of belief in myself and my preparation. And it was like, how do we close that gap? And so, just trying to figure out what was holding me back, not just training, that was part of it, but like, how do I buy into this? And then I was watching other people have success and we were doing the same work, like something's missing. So that kind of sent me down the path, just answering those questions.
Right on. Well, one last question on the mental performance front. And again, to set a little bit of context for this question, you've competed and excelled on some of the biggest stages of the world. So with that in mind, how do you think about pressure? Like, is there anxiety there? Is there excitement there? Is it something else? Talk about just how you confront that inevitable, I don't know how to put it. It's just something we all deal with, right? So how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think I love it personally. Like, I think that's what I liked about the marathon was you're going to do 3 months of training and you get one opportunity. And then it's not like, oh, it went awry. Like, let me figure out what I can tweak and then go back in 2 weeks and do it again. Like, it's all on one day. And then you're stuck in your own head for 2.5 plus hours, just thinking about it and wrestling with it. So I really like it. I think it's this incredible challenge. But I know it's not for everyone. I think the cool thing about pressure is it's usually, it's kind of like this privilege, which is a cliche, like pressure is a privilege. But if you're in a position where pressure is on, it's because you've had a really great training and you're like, oh, I need to like turn this training into result, or like there's expectations from outsiders because I've proved myself in the past and now I need to do it again. So you're in a spot where you've already kind of proven yourself. So to me, it's sort of like there's just everything to gain and nothing to lose, which a lot of people maybe wouldn't necessarily look at it that way, I suppose.
Is that appreciation and love of pressure something that you think is just a part of your DNA, or was it something that you've come to love and appreciate over the years just with experience?
That's a good question. I mean, I've my career's so unique because I started kind of in a position where no one knew who I was or cared. So it was like I had to get on people's radar. So when I did, it was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, they actually care about me. Now let's stay here and let's keep showing that there's consistency and there's room for improvement. So I guess like maybe it was always there, but there's certainly been this process of like earning it. So I kind of appreciate it a little bit more. Right
on. Well, one of the things that I appreciate about you as well, you're multifaceted. Like, you're not just a pro runner, but you have a coffee business, which we should also probably talk about at some point. Right in this moment, I want to talk about your broadcasting career. You've started to do some work with NBC in recent years. Just to set the table, can you talk about how that opportunity came about, and I guess just generally what excites you the most about being involved from that side of running?
Yeah, so it was a very strange thing to come up, but Josh Cox is my agent. He was putting on the Marathon Project. He's worked with NBC in the past and would be on the broadcast. And so as he was putting that event on, I was like, oh, I would love to do the commentating for it. That would just be really fun. It was during COVID, so it was like there's nothing else going on, and I love to kind of talk shop. So that was on Runner Space, and then at the last second, they're like, we'll also put it on NBC. Did that show, super fun, and then I think 2 days later, got an email from one of the folks at NBC who does the track and field side of it, and was like, hey, you did a decent job. Like, would you like to do more? I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Throw me some dates and I'll see if it works. And then my next show was, I think, the New Balance indoor meet, which was like in the primetime slot, like no experience. They're just like, go get him, kid. So I went from the marathon to indoor track, and just a totally different ballpark, which was crazy. But I think I kind of talk about pressure a little. We talked about it just prior. And
yeah,
that's one of the things I really like about it is it's like this whole different way of being involved in the sport. And there's not like, the only way you get better is by reps and practice, but your reps and practice are like live on TV and just ripe for criticism. So it's been an interesting process. It's fun. And then you just go like, how can I get better? What can I work on? And anytime they offer a show, I'm like, yep, I'm there. Like, I'll do it. So it's this cool just thing I'm learning all from the beginning.
I was just going to ask you about preparation. Do you treat these events as seriously as you treat like the marathons you prepare for? Like, are you up at night researching the athletes and looking at like the fields and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do a fair amount of studying, and it's interesting. Like, the longer you're in it, you learn kind of the hacks. Like, at the beginning, I was spending a ton of time on it, and then like as you get closer to the meet, like 40% of the people are dropped out, so they're not even in the field anymore. So it's like, then you have to erase that from your memory. And then, so it's like learning who to study, when to study, and how to study, and then being organized. Like, it's just all these different skills that you wouldn't expect that you needed. Like, even just like how to be organized and like have your information to pull at the right time. that's part of the preparation. It's not necessarily knowing everything about an athlete, but being like, if this person makes an appearance, am I going to be able to find my notes that I have highlighted quick enough? So it's all these things that you learn on the fly.
Do you feel, and again, I apologize because I'm not as familiar with the media space in the road and track worlds, but has the athlete experience always been there in the broadcasting booth, or do you feel like what you're bringing to the table is something relatively new for a media outlet like NBC?
It's probably a good mix. I mean, Josh Cox is on there as a distance analyst for a long time. He was in the sport. And then Otto Bolden, obviously great sprinter, had a great career. They have Sonia Richards-Ross. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely high caliber athletes who've experienced it. And now Kara Goucher's there as well. I think something like when I watch shows and I'm like trying to pick up things that I can do, or, just listening from a different perspective now, I'm always like, I would never say that. Wow. Like what an interesting insight. But then I think of the things that I bring to the table, or like what I would say there. And they're just a totally different perspective. So I think it's like, there's no one right way to do it. And I guess watching it more, and even you watch other sports too, like there's some broadcasters in football, I'm just like, you're so not for me. And they're great. They're really good. They're offering great insight. It's just not my taste. And so it's a very personal thing. And like, you might be doing a really good job, but it's just not a certain person's cup of tea. So it's kind of great that we have a good lineup at NBC of a number of people who offer so much different perspective.
Well, like in your specific case, how do you like to see races, and what are you trying to convey to the audience when you're in the broadcasting booth?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, the analyst can bring is like having been in the situation before. So it gets a little tougher, like indoor track, 800 meters, like it gets kind of, have to take some gambles and be like, this is probably what it's like. But, if you're doing a 3,000 meter indoor championship, I can tell you what those are like, what it's like to try to qualify for a team, to make the move. If you're going to be, do I try to win, or is third enough or second enough? Like, is it, so just having been in a lot of those situations before, that's what I can offer, is just like, I've been there. I know what they're thinking. I know what they're feeling. I know what the pressure's like. And just conveying that to someone who is seeing it from the outside.
Yeah. You talked about what you don't like to see from some NFL broadcasters out there. Is there anything, without necessarily implicating anybody, is there anything, like, I should say, like repetitive or stale in the way we commentate running events that you'd like to see change?
Oh, I think it's, the whole thing. We just get kind of locked in routine. Like even the production meetings that we have, like it's same old, like who's the three people you stars to watch? Like, are we going to put them as like, how are the graphics going to look? But it's all like punched into the same format, and we do the same thing every week, which, you get better at it through repetition, but it does start to feel like, does Brussels Diamond League feel any different than, Rome or, whatever, Zurich? And they all start to kind of feel the same as the season goes along. So I think if you could mix it up and have each show feel a little bit different, not just like by competitors and events, but literally by the show, that would be really interesting, and it might catch an audience's attention a little bit more. But track and field's crazy because it's like there's just so much going on, and you have to try to get the field events in, and that always comes in the distance because that's where there's the time. And so I don't know from a production standpoint, like how you create a show that's very different, but I'll get all the elements in that you need. And then one of the biggest problems is most of these races, you're dependent on the feed that's coming from the international, like it's the world feed. So you're not in control of what cameras are showing what and when and where. You just get like, hey, we're getting, 4 minutes of the 3,000 meters, then they're going to cut to pole vault. So, we'll give you a 15-second heads up when we're going to switch. And then you just go with it. So there's a lot of problems in making it fresh and interesting. So I guess being really good at the format we have is good for now.
This is a pretty big picture question, but for example, I've heard Chris Chavez and Kyle Merber at Sidious Mag talk about this a bit. So maybe I'll throw it to you as well. Do you have any opinions on how we can make running more interesting to a general audience, like getting beyond the hardcore fans that already tune in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is taking advantage of the longer events because there's just like this long form storytelling. So you can dig into the characters and what they're about off the course. You can talk about the ups and downs of the process and all of these things. You have, like, if it's a marathon, you have maybe a 2.5 hour show. So you can slow down and really tell the pieces of it and watch it unfold. In track and field, it's so hard because 1,500 meters, you have 4 minutes and 10 seconds, and you want to put a human interest piece in there, but you don't want to take away from the actual sport, like the competition. So it's like that. I think it becomes like, can you get the same people in a circuit week after week after week? So then you get the long form, like now you can tell a story and it builds each week. But then it's like there's DNFs and there's last second drops. And so track and field gets a much more tricky to like kind of tell those stories and get to know the personalities, because there's really great personalities in the sport. I think World Championships is a great opportunity to do that. You have the rounds, you have the heats, and it's just more touch points with the audience.
I understand that you are also an avid F1 fan as well. And, talking about that Netflix series is all the rage these days, even in our own sport. Is there any lessons that we can take from what they've done in their sport to be applied here to the running world?
Yeah, we could definitely get more money. Like if you give every athlete, a couple $1 million contract and they're taking summer break in Monaco and on their yacht, I think would be super cool. I think it's the same type of thing though. Like they have the series, we know the schedule, we know who the drivers are. Like you get to know those guys, and it happens over 8-10 months or whatever. So that's just a better way to like follow the stories. I don't know. I think there might be something like with the teams, like, cause then you have the coach is always the coach and the team is always the team. So maybe the athletes kind of rotate in and out, but there's some consistency to tell that story. So I think that might be a way to make it work.
I saw in a recent Runner's World article that you've gone on record saying that you want to have there's 3 more good races that you want to have in your career on the road scene. So maybe the answer is already there, but can you talk a bit about what stage you're at in your career right now as it applies to marathoning?
Yeah, I'm hanging on, the hanging on phase. I think, I think I'm kind of coming around. Like last fall was just really rough. I came off the 50K world record, then just had some inefficiencies in my stride and was really struggling training. So that was tough. And then wound down from Boston, did Boston last fall, did Boston again in the spring, and felt like with 4 weeks to go to the spring Boston, all of a sudden things started clicking a little bit more smoothly. Like I felt like my former self. But I had 4 weeks to really kind of dig in there. It just wasn't enough time. But ran respectable there. I think I was 13th and sub 2:30. And then I think the big mistake would have been to be like, okay, I have momentum now. Like, let's push, let's find another race. Let's go, like, get that reward. Right. But I took some time off because I think that's the appropriate thing to do if you're trying to think long-term. And I think that's paid off. Like, I feel like the workouts I've had heading into New York this fall feel like really smooth, and I'm in a really good spot. Like with those inefficiencies, they've kind of ironed out. So now I think I'm looking at 2024. I have that circled with the trials, if we have a trials, whoever they may be. So that year, and then working backwards, like what are these races going to do to make sure that last 2024 race is like when you highlight and circle go, you want that to be a winner.
Yeah. Well, if we backtrack just a little bit, like to 2020, when you went for and got the 50K world record, were we just fortunate to see you do that performance because of the pandemic? Like if it weren't for the pandemic, would you have just kind of sped forward with your typical road cycles?
Most likely. Yeah. I mean, I think it would have been interesting. I think we would have stayed on the road, stayed in the marathon, but maybe like instead of circling 2024, maybe it would have been 2022. Okay. And then let's just pivot to the longer stuff. Cause it's like, you don't want to get to the ultra trail stuff and be like, well, now I have nothing left. I'm just like parlaying this and just like out there. Like I want to get there and like still have some legs under me and still have the engine and feel like hopefully I'm competitive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember if I rack my brain, I remember I think Billy Yang did a video of you. It was like one of your final workouts for that effort, which was so badass and it inspired the hell out of me. But can you talk about like how that effort felt and maybe like what your immediate reactions were and whether it hooked you or you were like, no, there's a reason why I'm not doing that right now. And I'll see you in a few years.
Yeah, well, so the workout he filmed was 26.2 mile day. It was supposed to be 26, but they were not going to let me get in the car without doing the 0.2. So this 26.2 workout day, and there was a workout within it of 3x5 miles. So for me, it was like this. I've never done a long run over 20 unless it was for a marathon race. But it's late in that workout running. I want to say I was in the 535, 540 ranges, like, mile 24, 25 of my day. And it kind of made me go like, I wonder how much longer I could do this. When would the wheels fall off? So I do think it kind of made me excited about it. And as far as the 50K race went, it was the same sort of thing where it's like, you have to respect the distance because I haven't gone that far before. But you get in the late miles and you're like, wonder if I could have pressed a little bit harder. I wonder if I was like respected it a little bit too much. And it was hard late, but there was still like, I think I could go faster at this. So I think that sort of thing is hanging around in my head. Like, how much faster can I go? And then also like what distance is right for me? I think there's a lot longer stuff in my future.
This next question is a little bit philosophical, but I'm curious. And I feel like to preface it, like it already happens to some extent on the road scene. Like I see athletes naturally phase up from like the 5K to the 10K to the half marathon. But generally, how do you think about transitions in your career? Like when you think about potentially making the jump from the marathon scene to the trail world, is that something that you're meeting with like internal resistance, or are you excited and motivated? Like, how do you think about all that?
No, I'm pretty fired up for it. I mean, I didn't spend a ton of time on the track in my career. I went from college and then I want to say I did a season as a pro on the track. And then I wanted to make a trials and it wasn't going to happen on the track. So it was like, well, the marathon's like wide open. And I got my qualifier pretty easily and just like really took to the training. I was like, oh, this is like, I'm made for this. I'm built for this. So I kind of skipped a lot of the track side of my professional career because I'm like, there's no reason for me to be like struggling in something that I might be okay at, but I'm never going to be like an upper tier person. And I've been solid at the marathon for a long time. But I think the game's really changed lately. Like the times are just getting faster and, my natural progression is to get slower as you age. And so I don't want to wait too long and be like, well, let me run till I'm 45 on the roads. And then when I'm totally out of gas, I'll just extend to the next thing. It's like, I want to jump and I might even be a little bit behind now. Like I want to make that jump when I can be competitive and really test myself. And there's going to be just this crazy learning curve with trail. Like if that's the route I go, it's not like, I don't expect to be like, I'm going to knock heads with the front right away. I think that there's just so much to learn about it. But maybe that takes a year or 2 or 3, and then there's still a little bit left in the legs to be competitive. So it is a timing thing where I would like to go and have a chance to make a splash.
Just generally, I'm always fascinated by these types of transitions. Like one of the most notable examples in our sport to date is when Magda Boulet made the transition from the roads to the trails, and she ended up having just a phenomenal career here as well. But I'm always wondering, like, whether this stuff, like, what percentage of this is driven by like a love of the game versus like its business. And in your case, like, is your primary sponsor Brooks? Are they equally as excited about this move to trails and ultras?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that they're pretty much behind. I think they're investing in a big way in trails right now. And, whether that includes me or not, they'll be fine either way because they have some great athletes already. But they're just super supportive of me in general. And we've been kicking the idea around for a bit, and I've always talked about UTMB. Like, I just think that's the most fascinating race. And
Yes.
I don't know if I'll do UTMB or if it's going to be like OCC or CCC, or, you know, there's all these different options, but they were like, well, let's get you out. Let's get you out there so you can see it, so you can be around it. Like, and that'll help make your decision easier or not, you know, like, so they're certainly behind whatever I decide to do next. So
well,
that helps.
I know that you were in Chamonix last month. So talk about your experience there and like what it was like, who you ran with, memorable moments, conversations, anywhere you want to take that.
Yeah. So we have a 13-year-old pup who's like on his last legs. And so my husband was like, I'll stay here. I'll take care of the pup. And I've been trying to like not talk about it too loudly. So I'm like, it was fucking awesome. Like, I don't want to break his heart because he would have loved to have been there. So I'm like, oh, it was just all right, dude. But it was amazing. Like, just obviously you get to a place like that and you're like just inspired by how beautiful it is. And, the level of energy in the downtown. And, you know, even if there wasn't an event going on, it's like everyone's outdoors, doing stuff. So easy to be inspired. And then I got in, I think Monday, like 10 a.m. or we landed at 8 and then drove up. So it was around 10 a.m. I got to the hotel. They're like, well, your room will be ready at 4. And so photographer Andy Cochran, I don't know. We had been messaging. He's like, oh, let's go for a run when we're out here. So I texted him. He's like, we'll do 25K, just a loop. I have Ruth Croft. She's going to take us on a 25K loop. So I'm like with the best of the best. And they just freaking hammered me. Like, they're running so easy, but it just took forever. And it was so eye-opening. I was like, oh, I'm terrible at this. Like, this was a horrible idea. You know, like it was like a 4-hour run or something for 25K. I was just like whooped afterwards. And then the next day went up with another group of people, the Brooks runners. We just did a quick 3-mile run, and it was another big, you know, ordeal where we're just taking gondolas and run hiking. But then I started to get my legs under me, and I was like, okay, like, this is interesting. And so by the end of the week, like, it was just like trial by fire early. And then as the week went on, I was like, no, I'm super intrigued. Like, I watched the races. We got out in a couple spots on the course. And I think the mindset kind of shifted where I was like, maybe like I would have to move some, like I was strategizing. Like, that's what happened by the end. I was like, well, what would I do if I were running this? Where would I go? Where would I train? Like, how would I push the course? How would I work? And so like, that's the mindset I left with. And I was talking to my agent. I was like, if I can get in OCC next year, 100%, like I'm going to do it. But that's the problem is if I run a spring marathon, then I got to figure out a qualifier. So it gets really tight, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I left going like, let's figure out how we can do this, which I think was an exciting place to leave after that first day.
Hearing that OCC is potentially on your radar for 2023 is some of the most exciting news I think we'll have heard in the trail running world to date. There is this totally wacky, in my opinion, not well put together running stone system that UTMB has created it's like a bunch of hoops you have to jump through racing wise to get to OCC, but I wonder what could happen. I guess another question I have for you there, like when you were on these runs with like Ruth Croft, for example, were you noticing where your natural strengths and weaknesses were on the trails? Like, I have to imagine like aerobically, you must have felt pretty solid on the climbs.
Yeah. I mean, I was noticing most of my weaknesses, like just watching, you know, those guys take off and, that's sort of where I left though. I was like, I think I could like just really rip these uphills. Like, I think I would be really good at that. But then I think that was sort of driven by the idea of like my weakness would be the downhill. One, I'm just inexperienced, like in where to put my feet and like finding the right line. And like just being fearless, kind of going down the hill. But also we were doing a lot of switchbacks, obviously, as you're coming down, and like, I'm wired to go straight forward and that's it. And so there's like this level of agility on the switchbacks where it's like, oh, like my hips don't do that. So, that's kind of like in the whole strategy thing going on in my mind. I'm like, well, I know I can run up these things like nobody's business. Like I still feel really strong doing that. So it's kind of working through all that.
You mentioned the opportunity to meet and run with Ruth Croft. Did you get any other cool networking opportunities in that week in Chamonix?
I ran with the whole Brooks team, which was really fun. Got to spend some time with the photographer, Luke Webster.
Yes.
He was a really good kid. And I'm sure I bumped into other people out there, but those were kind of highlights,
Couple, I guess, rapid fire questions here, just as it pertains to trail. You mentioned OCC could be on the radar for next year. Are there any other races in our sport that you've just been thinking about either over the years or recently that you'd want to do at some point in your career?
Yeah, that weekend was kind of interesting because that spring prior, after the kind of rough Boston Marathon buildup, before the 4 weeks where I felt good, I texted my agent and was like, UTMB, like one of these races, maybe OCC or Comrades. And we were having like trouble with the qualifying and we're like, I don't know if we could do it. So I was like, maybe let's do Comrades this year. And then I had 4 good weeks and I was like, wait, like pump the brakes. So Comrades is definitely bucket list. And then Western States, everyone, talks
Yes.
about, like, you'd probably be decent at that. So it seems like one that I should test the waters in at least. But yeah, and all of that's like timing, qualifying, and so on and so forth. So we'll see again if I'm even any good at it.
How about in terms of inspirations in our sport? Are there any people that you enjoy following on social media or just chatting with, either past or present?
It's such a cool space. Like that's what's so fun is I just feel like everyone's really like welcoming and like, yeah, like we can't wait for you to come over here and like let's like have a beer after our run. And so just like anybody that you kind of bump into in the trail scene, it seems like I'm going to follow you and then see who you're following. So it was really cool to meet Ruth Croft and Courtney DeWalter is like obviously someone that I would love to meet, but I know all about her and just so inspiring. Sally McRae ran with us for the 50K and just super nice person. So it's like you meet these people and they tell you about their friends and you're like, well, we got to run someday. So it'll be a really fun thing to kind of get into these events and meet more people and just follow them.
Looking out a bit into the future, at what point in your career or like what year down the road are you fully invested in trail and ultras? Like you're just exclusively racing these types of events?
That's a good question. I don't know if it'll be like ever, like exclusive. I think it's like one of those things where I talked about not really spending much time on the track in my career, but I always got back to touch on the track because I think it helps, with the other stuff. Something that was really interesting coming back was like my long runs after running on the trail for, a week. I came back and did an 18 miler and I was like, Coach, I felt like so smooth. It went by so fast. Like mentally, I was like, this is the shortest run of my life. And it just felt like I wasn't paying attention the whole time, like where to put my foot. So I think there's like an interesting compliment. And I do think at some point you have to like commit in a big way, but I think it would be a mistake to not come back and touch on it every now and then. So I think there'll still be roads in the mix.
You mentioned earlier when you were talking about OCC that your mind immediately went to like what you have to change in your life to make preparation for this race successful, like where you got to live and stuff like that. Can you talk generally about how you might see your lifestyle and your training and just your general approach to running evolving when you just become more invested here?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question. And like, one, I have to find out if I'm good at it, because if I'm not good at it, like I'm not going to invest a ton of time in it. But I think it's like one of these things like on the roads, I'm like, man, it's so hard to commit to these big chunks of time. Like I got to go to Phoenix in the winter and be away from the family and so on and so forth to get ready for this. So part of me is like, I'm ready to stop doing that, but I don't necessarily think that's like the full story. It's like, I need to be excited about the next big thing to be able to do that. And so I think trail will allow me to do that. Like well, I really want to be all in because I do want to find out if I'm good. And then if I am good, like I want to be good. So then it's much easier to commit. So it'll be a little bit of like learning and finding out if I am fully in. And then it like kind of opens up the world. Like, well, let's go to really cool places that have great training areas and explore there, which, we'll have to see if the husband's supportive, but he's a skier, so he'll be fine.
Couple miscellaneous lightning round-esque questions before we close up. The first, again, a little bit philosophical, but what is something that you used to believe in / abide by strongly earlier in your career that you've recently changed your mind about? And I guess this question could be applied either to running or some other area of life.
Yeah, I feel like running specifically so much that I bought into earlier. I'm just like, that was stupid. I think there's kind of this pretentiousness about pro running or high level running. And it's like, don't run with headphones or don't run on treadmills or, like you're not getting tougher. And it's like miles or miles or miles. It doesn't matter. Like if you have headphones on, they still count. Miles run at 3:00 in the afternoon are just as good as miles run at 8 a.m. on the dot, as long as you're getting the work in. And it's enjoyable like that makes it a little even better. So I think there's like a lot of these rigid structures and thought processes that maybe aren't necessarily true. And I've kind of gotten away from a lot of those.
What's a good book that you've read recently that you'd recommend to the audience to check out?
Oh, I'm reading the best thing I've read in a long time, which I haven't read many books this year, but it's called Meet Me in the Bathroom. And it's history or oral history of rock and roll in New York from 2000 to 2010. And it's like the yeahs, the Strokes, the White Stripes are in there. It's really good. And so it's like, interview style and just all these kind of quotes put together. It's fantastic.
Oh, that is so cool. And you have a book coming out yourself. I guess it's not coming out until next spring, but is there any little bit of a preview that you can provide to the audience?
Yeah, I think I'm super excited about it for one, finally it's been like, I feel like 2.5 years of work really. So I'm excited to let people know about it and that in April it'll be out and available. I think the through line is the Boston 2018 race. And I worked with Bonnie Ford on it. So I feel like the race writing is like, it's really fun and like kind of, you'll go through that whole process again, maybe be on the edge of your seat like you would be watching the race, which is pretty cool. And then it's just, insights into my career, how I got into the sport. I think there's a little bit of like business dynamics and, some of the things within the industry and like navigating that people aren't necessarily aware of and how it works. And I think I've always been a really big advocate for myself, which I think a lot of people sometimes need the nudge to do. Like you got to be your own biggest fan. So just learning how to do that and how that process was. And then, growing into the marathon, just figuring out that event and why it worked and how it worked and how I kept pushing myself forward.
There are a lot of coffee aficionados that happen to listen to this podcast. It's a great intersection between trail and coffee, and you have a coffee brand. So can you give us a little bit of a sense of like how that came to be and what you're selling, like what the products are?
Yeah. So I guess if you're a runner and listening to this, you're kind of like me. We would go out on trips, and obviously coffee is a big part of our morning. We'd go out on running trips and kind of find all the spots. And then when we were getting ready to go home, just like pitch the running shoes that were in the bag and like fill it up with like beans of coffee that we found from the local roasters. So that was kind of a tradition. And we'd come home with tons of bags of coffee, just trying it all and tasting it all. We were into it for a while, and then we decided it'd be kind of fun to try and roast and see what that was about. So we got the popcorn machine that you can do at home with the green beans, and you set off all the fire alarms and the dogs freak out. So we did that for a short amount of time, and we're like, we got to upgrade this process or stop. So we got like a real roaster, and just kind of grew from there, just trying to perfect the roast and dial it in and tune it to our taste, which is a little bit lighter on the roast profile. Okay. A lot of people love really dark coffee. It's not us. Ours is light roast, fruity, floral, try to get those, like the complexities in the lighter roast. And, we always have stuff on our site, coffeebylt.com. Again, Kenya, Ethiopia, Burundi, I don't know, we're all over the map. So, but it's all pretty light and rotates often.
Right on. Well, the last question I have for you, if you could put a message on a billboard for all to see, what would it say and why?
I would have to go almost a cliche for me at this point, but I would just put keep showing up, because I just think it's the advice we hate to hear, but we need the most, right? Like whatever's going on, whether you're having the day of your life, keep showing up and try to have some more. If you're down at the bottom of the well, you got to keep showing up and you're going to find yourself climbing out of it soon enough. But none of that happens if you don't start.
Awesome. Well, Des, I think I speak for a lot of folks when I say we're thrilled that you are interested in getting involved in our sport. We're excited to see what the next steps look like. I hope OCC can work out next year personally. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with before we go?
Thank you for having me. I mean, like I said earlier, I just feel like it's this incredibly welcoming and inviting community, and I don't know where my place will be within the sport, but I think as just a community member, I already feel like I'm a part of it, and I'm excited to see you all on the road or the trail soon.